Today's episode is brought to you by habwin.com. Check them out for some great cashback deals at www.habwin.com/getpokercashback-like-a-pro. Hey, poker people, it's Sky Matsuhashi, and this is the Smart Poker Study Podcast. In episode 132 last week, I answered 2 listener questions about keeping your poker study notes extremely organized and getting beyond your fear of being bluffed. Hey, poker people, thanks for joining me today and for sharing this show with someone you love, or at least, someone that you kind of know a little. Well, I guess you gotta kind of like someone if you're talking to them at all. So thanks for sharing with people you at least kind of like. So things are going great in my world right now, My book came out, How to Study Poker Volume 1, and it's available in both ebook and paperback forms. There was a little issue with the audiobook. I got to go back and fix a little bit of formatting stuff. On top of this, on top of my book being available, my 28 days of poker study is going super well. I'm really enjoying it, waking up early every morning, getting people participating, getting people watching after the fact, emailing questions and all that kind of stuff. So things are going really well there, and I feel that I'm delivering some great content, and I'm delivering on my promise to do it every single day and to help you learn how to learn poker. So please join me there, But that's enough about me. Let's get to the learning. Today marks the start of the next minimum effective dose. It's MED number 6 called Cbet Principles. There's going to be 4 classes to this MED in total. Today's class number 1, of course, which is just Cbet Principles. So it's going to be a long one as I get into principles that you need to pull off good Cbets. The next class is going to be about board textures, and that's something I discussed in yesterday's Twitch study stream, but we'll talk about how board textures affect your c-betting, and the third class will be about planning for the future and double barreling, and the fourth class will be defenses against the c-bet. So please visit the show notes page for everything I discussed today, along with screenshots and links at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod133. While you're there, you can sign up for the weekly boost for exclusive poker strategy direct to that inbox. Alrighty, let's get to it. Gambate!
And now for our feature presentation.
So before we get to the Cbet, let me ask a quick question. Why are we studying the Cbet now? Why not start post-flop talk with the donk lead, or the check raise, or post-flop math, or maybe specific lines to take, Well, I want to tackle this question in terms of poker's focusing question. And I talk about this question in my book, but here's the poker focusing question for you. The question is, what's the one thing I can study right now, such that by learning it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? Once again, let me ask you that question. What's the one thing I can study right now, such that by learning it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? So when it comes to post-flop poker, the Cbet is the one thing to learn before all others. Everything post-flop revolves around making Cbets or fighting back against your opponent making a Cbet. As a tag or a lag player, you use plenty of pre-flop aggression. Well, because you raise more than you call, in what situation do you mostly see the flop? You most often see it as the pre-flop aggressor with one or more callers. Hopefully, you don't see it more often as the caller, or as the limp caller, or as the fourth over caller. You don't want to play such passive poker pre-flop. You want to get to the flop as the aggressor. And because you see the flop most of the time with the initiative, your first option is to c-bet the flop, or to just check. Understanding the principles underlying good flop c-bet decisions is the foundation on which we'll build the rest of our post-flop game. Alrighty, so let's get to the Cbet. We'll start with a simple definition. The continuation bet, or the C-bet as I always call it, it's a bet on the flop made by the pre-flop aggressor in the hand. So you raised, somebody called, and now you have the lead once the flop hits. Whether you're in position or out of position, you're the one making the C-bet. And that's great. So now we know what it is. But why do we do this? Why do we make C-bets? And there are 3 key reasons for C-betting. The first reason is you displayed strength by raising pre-flop. Your opponent is weak because they just called, and now you're putting pressure on your opponent, and you're utilizing fold equity to win that pot right now. The second reason we c-bet is that most hands, and ranges of hands, they aren't really improved much on the flop. Most ranges quote-unquote hit the flop about 35% of the time. And by hit, I mean they flop top pair or better, or an open and a straight draw better. So if they hit only 35%, that means they miss 65% of the time. So your opponents are often more likely to fold on the flop. And the third reason we Cbet is we're going for value. If you flop a hand worthy of going for value, and the stacks are deep, you've got to get more money in now so that you can pile more money in later, and eventually get all the money in and just stack your opponent. So now that we talked about the what and the why of Cbets, let's talk about our two different types of Cbets. Value Cbets and Bluff Cbets. So the most important question to ask yourself before you click that button is, why am I Cbetting? The answer should be for value or as a bluff. If you're just betting to bet, then you're making a huge mistake right there. So we'll first talk about value bets. If you're going for value, you must be able to name some hands out of your opponent's range that you beat and that they will call you with. If there's nothing they'll call you with and they're just folding all of their hands on this board, then you may be better off just checking instead. When it comes to bluffs, on the other hand, if you're bluffing, you must be able to name hands in their range that you beat, but that they can also be folding. If they're not folding, you're not bluffing. And that is key, so I'm going to say it again. If they are not folding, you are not bluffing. And most of the time, when we discuss Cbetting, we're talking about it in terms of bluffing or semi-bluffing. Like I already said, most ranges hit only 35% of the time. So if you're Cbetting 70% or more than half of your Cbets are bluffs. This same idea of most flops not helping most ranges, that's why your opponents nowadays don't fold so easily to Cbets. You're Cbet bluffing because they likely didn't improve, and they're calling you your Cbet because you likely didn't improve. It can be a game of chicken, but if you're using a HUD and they are not using a HUD, then you've brought a tank and they've brought a Volvo to this duel. So let's talk about some important stats. Before you Cbet, you'll want to know what to expect from your opponent. So these particular HUD stats will help you figure that out. The first stat is fold to Cbet. The higher the better when you're considering a bluff Cbet, of course. Anything over 65% means that they're pretty flop honest versus Cbets, and you can push them off more easily. The second stat is raise Cbet. Some players like to raise Cbets as bluffs, especially when they are in position. Anything over 10% is likely a bluffer, and over 20% is surely a bluffer. You only flop strong hands worthy of raising and bloating the pot. You only flop hands that strong maybe 10% of the time. So this is the cutoff percentage, roughly 10%. 10 to 20 is kind of middle ground, over 20 for sure bluff. And the third stat we want to look at is check raise. And it kind of goes along the same lines as that raise Cbet stat. Over 10% is a bluffer. Over 20% for sure a bluffer. If you've played 1,000 hands and you've never seen this particular player check raise until now, get out of there unless you're near the nuts. You also want to be aware of your own Cbet stat. What does your current stat at this table say about you? If it's at 35% over 100 hands, then you're pretty straightforward and flop honest. If it's at 55%, then you're mixing in some bluffs and semi-bluffs with your value hands. And if it's at 75% or greater, then you're full of it and your perceptive opponents will notice this and play accordingly. Image is so important at the tables, and you must expect your opponents to respond to this appropriately, just as you would to their image. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about sizing right now. The main thing with sizing your value bets or your bluff bets is that you don't want to telegraph your hand strength with your sizing. We all know that anything between a min bet to a half pot is often a weak bet. So don't bet that if you're bluffing, especially if you're bluffing. Don't bet that. I recommend you size all of your bets at 2/3 to 3/4 pot every single time, regardless of bluff or value. You want to keep it the same and they'll be less likely to glean some information from your sizing. Now, there is something to say for sizing it slightly smaller with your bluffs to save you some money, and sizing it a little bigger with your value bets to earn more money. But don't just do so willy-nilly. Consider the opponent you're up against. If they'll fold to a smaller bet just as often as a bigger one, then make it smaller. If they're a station and they'll call a 3/4 pot bet just as frequently as a 2/3 pot bet, then bet bigger. Whatever your goal is, tailor it to the opponent and to get the reaction you want from them. Today's sponsor is Habwin.com. Do you want to earn profits like a professional poker player? Now you can hit your profit goals with a little help from some extra professional level rake back. check out www.habwin.com/getpokercashback-like-a-pro, and that's all one word. Go there and discover how you can get your cash back and more benefits when playing in your favorite rooms. This is only at www.habwin.com/getpokercashback-like-a-pro. So, like I said at the beginning of the episode, my book is now available as an ebook and paperback, and hopefully they will approve and release the audio version once I update the files. And by they, I'm talking about Amazon. Yep, How to Study Poker Volume 1 is self-published on Amazon. You can find it through just a simple Amazon search, How to Study Poker. So please buy it to support the show and to give yourself a leg up on your studies. Plus, give it an honest rating to help spread the word. I really appreciate it. All those kind of reviews that I've been receiving so far, thank you all very much. You guys rock super hard. Oh, and if you send me your review, I'll send you the audiobook version to thank you for sharing your opinion with others. And of course, my 28 days of poker study on Twitch is going swimmingly. To learn more or to join me on this journey, please visit smartpokerstudy.com/28days and support the show by visiting Patreon at www.patreon.com/smartpokerstudy. Go there, support the show, and get some nifty rewards for your support. Alrighty, back to class, poker people. So let's talk about your opponents and positions. Sometimes we get to the flop heads up. Heads up pots are much easier to gain value from, as well as easier to bluff at. You only have one opponent and one range to be concerned with. But multi-way pots are a different story. It's tougher to bluff multi-way as so many ranges, and often, they're very wide ranges because they're calling with such good pot odds pre-flop. Those wide ranges, and so many of them, they're sure to connect with the board in some way. Getting all these players off the pot with a Cbet is pretty darn tough. Another thing that makes Cbets difficult is being out of position. Give yourself a better chance at successful Cbet bluffing by making them more in position as opposed to out of position. People love to float the Cbet, then take it away from you when you check the turn. If you only want to fire one barrel, and you think it'll take more than one to get your opponent off their hand, don't fire that first one, especially if you're out of position. And real quick, a little bit about board textures. I know we're talking about it next week, but, I just want to say it here. Texture does matter. Think about their calling range and how well it hits the board. A calling range comprised of small to medium pairs, lots of suited connectors, and maybe some broadways. It doesn't hit a board like Ace 4-3 all that well, nor does it hit a King 9 deuce flop so well. But this kind of range, the middle card and pocket pair heavy range, that hits a 5-7-8 or a 10-9-8 or a monotone or a two-tone flop very well. I'll dive into board textures like I said in next week's episode, but for now, if the board smacks their range, you should be much less likely to bluff Cbet. Alrighty, let me sum all this up for you with a couple of Cbetting checklists. For value Cbetting, you must be able to name the weaker hands they can call you with. If they'll fold everything you beat and only call with better, just don't make the bet. You must look at their HUD stats first to help give an indication of their likely response, and you want to size it to 2/3 or 3/4 pot, and adjust it slightly up or down depending on how likely your opponent is to call or how likely they are to fold. Be much more careful when Cbetting into a multi-way pot, and you need to consider the board texture and how their range interacts with it. And for bluff Cbetting, if you can list better hands that they will fold, then go ahead and make the Cbet. If they won't fold, don't bluff. And if the board texture smacks their range, once again, don't bluff, of course. If you're out of position, you want to be less inclined to bluff Cbet. And if it's a multi-way pot, be less inclined as well. Challenge! Here's my challenge to you for this episode. Ask yourself the poker-focusing question to guide you to your next area of study. What's the one thing I can study right now, such that by learning it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? Your answer to this question is the next item you must study, as it will build a foundation for future studies. Now it's your turn to take action and Scooby-Dooby-Doo something positive for your poker game.
Now get it on.
This episode isn't complete until you head to the show notes page at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod133. Go there for screenshots and links to everything discussed today and to discover ways in which you can support the podcast and keep me keeping on. Thank you so much for listening today, and thank you to our show sponsor today, habwin.com. Please visit www.habwin.com/getpokercashback-like-a-pro. Go there to sign up for a great cashback deal. Alrighty, if you could type the words Smart Poker Study, you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. Or just send me an email, sky@smartpokerstudy.com. And a couple of shout-outs today. I've got to thank Robert Diprose for purchasing my Smart HUD. Thank you so much, Robert. I hope those videos that I sent you, I hope they help you get the HUD uploaded into your Poker Tracker 4 and get you started on the right path to really exploiting those opponents. Thank you so much, Robert. And Briar Calvert supported me on Patreon this month. Briar, you the man, my first April supporter this month. I love it. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate your support, and for everyone else on Patreon, you guys rock hard. I love you all for your support. So if you want to support the show like these incredible poker people, please visit the show notes for links to how you can do so. Alrighty, poker people, next week in episode number 134, I'll hit class number 2 in the Cbet MED when I get deep into flop board textures. It's going to be packed with info, so get your pencil and notepad ready. Word of mouth is the best advertising, so thank you very much for sharing the show with other poker people. Your sharing and caring is what helps us grow. Until next time, study smart, play much, and make your next session the best one yet.